Hello everybody, welcome to my workshop. This talk is part of a weekly series dedicated to team engagement, event design, learning experience, effective communication, and a bunch of other topics that I consider to be the nuts and bolts of effective leadership. Today is kind of special because normally I do record those live every Thursday as a LinkedIn event, but this week, believe it or not, I'm not actually here. I'm on holiday. So this is Aleš from the past talking to you. And to give it this raw, authentic feel that it usually has, I'll made a pledge to not edit out anything. So there will be some and us from my end. There might be some hesitations as I'm following my notes in real time, but I believe that gives you this extra sense of a feeling that it's happening in the moment. So let's start with the topic of the day. The topic of the day is how to measure the return on investment of your meeting or event or workshop, conference, whatever you organize when you're trying to summon your people together for a common purpose. This topic is of course important because companies, and not just companies, even individuals are very conscious about the time and money they are investing. And putting people into one room, whether it's a physical room or a virtual one, it costs money because they are not supposed to be or can't be anywhere else. And they still need to get paid. And even if they're not paid, even if it's a voluntary pro bono event, they are opportunity cost. They simply could be someplace else doing something else, as could you. So that's why I need to try extra hard to provide you value through this talk, right? So who am I to actually talk about this? I did facilitate, design, organize, or produce in some capacity face-to-face events for over 2,000 people in the last 5 years. And I served over 20,000 participants through virtual or hybrid events. So I guess I have some experience, and I also have some data that could actually provide us insight about what this return on investment when it comes to event organization mean. So suppose you are someone responsible to organize team meetings. You don't even need to be too high in the food chain. Most of us are actually organizing meetings. Even if you're not a people manager, you are the one, even as a solo contributor, who is sending invites to people, asking them to join a meeting with you. So in any situation when you are actually pushing the button that says invite, you are taking responsibility for providing some value and providing some sense of this meeting, because you are taking a slice of time from everyone's life. So that would be why I think this is important for you. The topic is really vast, and as I was going through my notes, I won't be able to cover all the nooks and crooks of this topic. So if you find it useful today, of course, subscribe to my podcast, check the other episodes as they're going to be recorded, because I'm going to expand on these topics later on. And if you want a custom support with your event, with your meeting, with conference, whatever, you name it, direct message me on LinkedIn. We can have a conversation, and I'm going to help you designing a custom solution that will fit you. So let's go into our topic, how to measure the return on investment. I'm going to cover 3 parts of it. And these 3 parts are actually related to questions you are supposed to ask yourself when you are organizing these meetings. Question number 1, what problem are you trying to solve by the event? What are you trying to solve? We're going to go into that in details in a little bit. The second, what are your KPIs, key production indicators, that will tell you whether or not you have succeeded once the event is over. And the third one, how are you collecting and analyzing the data, indicating your success or failure, God forbid, when it comes to your event. So I'm gonna cover these 3. Everything else will be actually discussed in details in my future episodes. Let's start with the first one. What is the why? What's the reason for scheduling a meeting, event, or conference? It doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna avoid these, ubiquitous Simon Sinek quotes, start with the why, etc., etc. I'm sure you've read all of those. Let's talk about the reasons for scheduling a meeting or an event. In this case, whenever I'm going to talk about meeting, it will apply for conferences, it will apply for all hands or town hall meetings, it will also apply to workshops, learning or training sessions. The principles are the same. So thinking about the reasons why you would want to do that, you might think it's pretty clear, but not really. I tend to work with stakeholders who are sometimes perplexed by the question. Sometimes they think it's so obvious that they didn't really bother to answer it, write it down, answer it out loud. The answer might be, yeah, we always do that like this. For example, we do quarterly meetings like this. We do town hall meetings every quarter, and that is our why. It's the end of the quarter. That's nowhere near good enough. The why needs to be related to what you are trying to communicate to your people, or what value are you providing to them? Ideally, you cover both. So let's cluster it into a few reasons that you might have to run a meeting. And this is pretty much a finite list of reasons you might have. If you have other reasons, they would be easily clustered into one of the categories I'm going to mention. So one reason might be that you want to share an information with your people. That might be a reason to schedule a meeting. Another reason, you want to take a decision together with your people. Third is you might want to brainstorm or solve a problem. Maybe you want to ask for feedback. And number 5 on the list that we're going to use, maybe you want to boost engagement of your team. Maybe you want to boost team cohesion through shared experience they might have in the meeting. The 5th reason I provided is something that you do not all that often find on those lists of reasons to run meetings if you Google those. But I think this one is actually one of the most important. We're going to circle back to that. But let's go through the 5 reasons that I just outlined. Number 1, sharing information. So suppose the reason for you to schedule a meeting is that you want to share an important business update or a decision that was taken upstream that needs to be cascaded. Maybe you want to give your people instructions. Maybe you just want to tell them what is your vision for the team. This is a good place to pause a little bit and weave in what are your KPIs. So suppose you want to run a meeting to share information. How will you know you have succeeded? Well, will you know because you said your piece, because you just spoke into the camera, into the lens, and people were sitting in there on the meeting, hopefully not multitasking? Is that how you know this was successful? Maybe not. I mean, when I ask leaders, how would they know they were successful? Usually they want, through sharing the information, they want to ensure that people are actually informed. They actually absorbed the information. And if you ever participated on a meeting while you were bored to death and multitasked, I know you did that. I did it many times in my life. You know that being exposed to an information does not guarantee that you absorb the information. Maybe you've been on another call, maybe you've been doing your nails, maybe you've been shampooing your cat, maybe you've been distracted because whatever was happening and you didn't remember much after the meeting. So unless you are actually collecting or analyzing some sort of feedback that would tell you whether or not the information was absorbed, you will never know. What I want to bring in here as another concept that wasn't mentioned before, and people usually don't think about it when they are organizing meetings, is that meetings that allow or foster communication are not the only way to do that. A meeting is a synchronous way to communicate versus an asynchronous way to communicate. Meeting basically means that you force, quote unquote, force people to be in one place at the same time. And remember, one place might meet, virtual meeting room. It doesn't need to be a physical place. Synchronous communication could be actually, I guess a good metaphor for that would be a team game. So if you play team sports, any team sports are actually a synchronous game. If you play football, people need to be together and they need to react to the movement on the ball and the acts of their opposing team in real time. On the contrary, asynchronous communication is more like turn-based games. Let's say the game of chess. You make a move and then you wait. You are basically idling, wait till your opponent makes a move. In communication, the synchronous communication, the communication which is synchronized in real time, is a meeting. A synchronous one would be instant messaging. It would be, Skype, Zoom, Chime, whatever you use when you're just sending messages and you're just waiting for the person to come back. Email, of course, is a typical way of asynchronous communication. Why am I mentioning it? As I said before, meetings take money and they actually take convenience out of people's calendars because they need to be somewhere at a specific time. If the purpose of your meeting is to share information, maybe you should think again. Do you really need to use synchronous way of communicating it as a meeting, or could you just send it by email? You wouldn't believe, or actually maybe you would believe, how many people who provided feedback on the events I secured are saying, quote unquote, it could have been an email. There was no need for us to meet. It wasn't dense enough. This is, of course, something you want to avoid. So if the purpose of your meeting was to share information, ask yourself, do I really need to do that in a synchronous way? Or could I just share a memo? More often than not, the answer is yes. You can just share it by email. The concerns that leaders have when it comes to asynchronous communication is they are worried that people will not read the email. They will miss it. They will not internalize it. They will just not do anything with it, while talking to them in the meeting ensures that they will pay attention. But that's not really the case. I'm not going to go into all the details in this episode. That's for later. But just two things to consider. Number one, what does this say about you trusting your team? When you think they are not going to react to information shared by email or instant messaging, what does that say about communication in your team in general? I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff you are communicating by email and you are assuming that people are reading it. The second reason to consider is, there are mechanisms available that would allow you to share things asynchronously and still get response, still get some action, some buy-in. The easy way to do that, or let's say simple, not easy way to do that I'm helping my stakeholders with is assigning micro task or micro feedback. Here's an email. Once you have read it, please click on this button and tell me how this is going to be reflected by your work or how you're going to integrate it into your day-to-day. You can then monitor how people reacted. It's a little bit of check whether or not people read the information, and also it gives you some feedback about how it landed. So this would be if your why was to share information on the meeting. bottom line, I would question whether or not you really need to do it by a meeting. There are some situations when you need a meeting, but it's fairly rare. Let's talk about another why, another reason you might want to run a meeting. And that would be to take decisions, and specifically to take decisions with your team. That's a pretty good reason, and I agree this might warrant a synchronous meeting. But similarly to sharing information, similarly to what I said before, there are ways that could be implemented that allow you to take collective decision in a synchronous way. You can actually collect inputs of your team through virtual systems. There are a bunch of tools available online now. There are Miro boards, virtual spreadsheets, virtual flowcharting, and collaborating tools. I'm not going to go into details in here. That's for another episode. But they are pretty convenient ways that would allow people to provide their inputs or to vote for a decision that you are proposing without necessarily being in the same virtual or physical room at the same time. One more thing I want to say about taking decisions together. I would ask you to really look hard into what you mean by taking decisions together. If you are a team leader, sometimes it might mean for you that you are summoning the team. You already have the decision in your mind. You are not going to be swayed, and you just want to communicate it to the team and make them feel that their concerns are heard. That is, of course, fine, and it might contribute to team cohesion and team engagement. Just the fact that you are willing and able to hear the concerns of your people before the decision is taken is very positive for the way you're going to be perceived by your team. At the same time, I will invite you to be honest about it. Are you only communicating the decision that's already made in your head and trying to have the concerns of your team heard, or are you actually asking for inputs and making the decision on the spot? Being honest and open about it on the meeting is crucial. Because this basically defines the rules of engagement for your team. It is very disempowering and disengaging if you let your team speak, if you let them believe that they are contributing to a solution or to a decision, and at the end you reveal that you've actually already decided. If you think that you can fake it, you can pretend you are making the decision on the spot based on the inputs, think again. People can usually tell, and they can tell that you're just faking it and you already made up your mind. If you do that, it will backfire. So be honest about it. There's nothing wrong with having the decision already made, but it is not advisable to pretend otherwise. There are, of course, a synchronous way that you can do that we already mentioned. I'm not going to cover them for now. But what I want to cover in here is also a disadvantage of taking decisions with the team in real time. You know that people in the team may have different preferences when it comes to communication and decision taking. It's the way I've seen it expressed, and I kind of liked it, is that some people talk to think and some people think to talk. So you will have people in the team who formulate, who actually create their ideas through talking them out loud, talking them through. Some others would like to get the inputs, walk away, maybe sleep on it, think through it silently, and then come back and present the result of their thinking. This second group is gravely disadvantaged on synchronous meetings because they don't usually have the time, they don't have the space to think, to analyze and come back. The talkers usually dominate the meeting. This means that you will have a part of your team, maybe the people with actually great analytical skills, whose inputs will be underrepresented in your final decision because they might not be so quick on their feet when it comes to expressing what they want to express and how they believe the decision should be shaped. So that's a potential advantage of asynchronous meetings when those I'm gonna say more deliberate thinkers have time to take a decision, submit it through a system or a voting mechanism, and having it kind of levels the playing field with the fast talkers. Let's talk about the reason number 3 to run a meeting, and I mentioned as a reason number 3 could be brainstorming or problem solving. And again, this implies the team will do it together. So there are, of course, again, ways that would allow you to do it asynchronously. So people can provide ideas, people can see their ideas on, for example, virtual whiteboards, and they could be inspired by what other people provided. So again, there are ways to do that without a synchronous meeting. But I agree with many people managers that synchronous meeting in this case has some benefits. It provides the energy for the team to kind of build upon one another ideas in real time. So I think this is a little bit like a ball game when you can create this excitement. It actually fits in to the reason number 5 to run meetings or events, which is the team engagement, which is the team cohesion. So a well-planned brainstorming can actually bring up team cohesion. But ask yourself, what are you actually after if you're organizing this, if you're bringing your people to such a meeting? If you want them to brainstorm, if you want them to solve a problem, is your primary goal to find a solution or to find these ideas? Or is your primary goal to bring people together? Or is it a combination of both? There are no right or wrong answers, but it is important for you to know what are you after, because that will affect how you want to design such a meeting and how you're going to measure the outputs. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because I've seen that way too many times, and I'm sure you did in your career, however short it might be. You've probably seen brainstorming sessions when people come together, they know there is a problem, they don't really have any specific structure in how to tackle the problem. They're just kind of stand in front of the blank sheet of paper or whiteboard and say, okay, so who's got an idea how we're going to solve this problem? Of course, with such an approach, you will not gonna accomplish much. Quite frankly, if people did know how to solve the problem through a simple question like that, they would have already solved it. Just because the brainstorming session is needed, that just proves that this problem is a difficult one and you need to support your team through a clever structure of a brainstorming or problem solving session. I'm not going to cover how you can structure that. I'm just going to say what you need is you need to compartmentalize the problem into smaller chunks. You need to have very robust note-taking system that would allow you to document the progress of the brainstorming session. And you also need to have ahead of time defined what are going to be the subsequent actions of the brainstorming session's outputs. I'm going to cover this in much greater detail in later episodes, or if you care about your specific team or business problem, send me a direct message on LinkedIn and we can have a chat. So coming back to the bigger idea of brainstorming or problem solving, what I normally see is a very poor execution when the brainstorming session is, or problem solving session is problem solving just by name. De facto, it's just people talking about a problem. They're just together, they talk about a problem with a common headline, and the whatever outputs they have are usually not captured in any systemic way. When the time runs out, you end up with a bunch of incoherent notes. Someone who's closing the meeting says, oh yeah, I'm gonna send you the meeting notes and we need to continue this ideation later on. But there never is a later on. You know, the notes end up at the bottom of someone's inbox and that's the end of it. And if the actual problem is resolved, it's not resolved in a session, it's resolved, you know, through a single decision of the senior manager, or it's resolved through some other mean. So don't do it like this. If you want the session that actually solves a problem, create mechanisms that allow that. If you want people just to talk about a problem, that is totally okay. It can boost team cohesion, it can boost rapport, it can boost engagement, it's okay, but be clear about that. Be clear about what is your why for this meeting. Don't fool yourself that you're going to come up with a solution when you're actually only going to come up with people having talked through their concerns, which might be enough. And it is actually a very valuable output. But be clear that this is the output you want before you run an event. Don't be surprised once the event ended that you didn't get what you wanted, which is kind of universal advice I would give you for any meeting. So that would be the reason number 3, brainstorming or problem solving. The reason number 4 to run a meeting would be asking for feedback. These meetings may or may not be useful. It depends on the number of participants and on the overall structure of participants. Are they all the same or similar seniority or job level in the company, or is it a mixed bag? Are they in a session which is led by their reporting manager or by someone who's neutral, who doesn't have decision-making power over them? If you have a session when you are asking people for feedback, like, hey, here's something, what do you think we should do? There are gonna be participants who are disadvantaged. Similarly to decision taking that I discussed earlier, when I said, analytical thinkers who need a little bit more time to express themselves might be disadvantaged on synchronous real-time meetings. In case of feedback meetings, people who are less vocal are disadvantaged. People who don't speak too much, because they will just don't get so much real estate on the meeting. They will not have so much time to speak. The energetic talkers will take more of the space. So their opinions will be overrepresented, while the quiet types will be underrepresented, despite the fact that they might be having concerns. I'm avoiding here the terms extroverts, introverts. You can use them like a simple labels, but the entire topic of extrovert, introvert is just too broad and difficult to cover. So I'm not going to go into these distinctions. But think about the meetings in terms of real estate that each person gets based on their willingness to express themselves. It will not create equal playing field. Who is also disadvantaged on meetings like that, especially when it's all in the open, would be junior employees. And they might feel the lack of psychological safety when they are asked openly in front of more senior employees about their feedback, especially if they want to provide negative feedback. it's actually very taxing and not easy at all to ask someone junior to directly provide feedback that is negative while the rest of the team is watching. So if you wanna real feedback that is reliable in terms of information you're collecting, I would recommend either to go to very small meetings. If you are able to manage it as one-on-one, that's of course ideal, but I understand it's not scalable. So if you need a scalable way to get reliable information when it comes to feedback, I would actually suggest asynchronous way of collecting this feedback through anonymous surveys. Anonymous surveys allow you to collect feedback in a scalable way. You can guide your feedback providers through structured questions. You can still keep open questions in there to allow unstructured anecdotal feedback to be provided. And it also creates equal space to everybody and the protection of anonymity. So such information might be more reliable than whatever people tell you in the meeting, where they might be too scared to fully tell you that they dislike something intensely. All right, so that would be the reason number 4, asking for feedback. And the reason number 5 that I added, and I think it's actually the most important one, is to boost team engagement or team cohesion through shared experience. The shared experience is something that can create and does create bonding. You know it yourself. I mean, if you compared some meetings that you may have participated on during pandemics, these meetings usually were virtual. Maybe they were hybrid, meaning smaller groups of people meeting in a physical place and being connected through virtual platform with larger groups someplace else. These meetings are just way less memorable. They do not allow for these informal exchanges, these water cooler talks, joking around, having dinner together, sharing their feelings and experiences. So having a synchronous meeting is actually a good way to achieve higher level of team cohesion, and it is a good return on investment to do those. It's of course surprisingly tricky to quantify, but just because you can't put an exact number on it doesn't mean that it's not worth the investment. It usually is. I suggest to be very open about this to be your goal. So if you want to achieve team cohesion, make it part of your KPIs. Make sure that you have this included in your why behind the event. I'm going to cover in one of the later episodes how exactly you can do that, how can you boost team cohesion, what types of shared experiences are working the best, and what is a frugal way to organize those. But because I'm kind of talking for a long time, I think I would like to move to the third topic or subtopic. So what we covered so far, we covered the why, like what problem are you solving by the meeting or event? It's something you need to answer for yourself. I kind of interlaced into it, what are your KPIs? How will you know you have succeeded? So now it's time to talk about how to collect and analyze the data regarding the event. Let's cover how I am doing it. So these days, mostly I'm designing and executing events for large-scale audiences, which means 100 people plus, and this means I need a scalable way of collecting data, collecting information about whether or not the meeting actually fulfilled its purpose. The way I'm doing it is online surveys, which we are delivering directly at the end of the meeting, because I want two things. I want reliable information. I want to make sure that whatever feedback I'm getting corresponds to what people actually experienced in the meeting and what they feel about it. That's why I want the data to be fresh. If you ask participants of a meeting, event, conference, whatever it is, how they like it, and if you ask them 1 week later, I am going to argue that the data you're collecting are not actually reliable and they are not all that useful. Think about any event you've been to. If you've been to Disneyland, if you've been anywhere, asking immediately when you are leaving the premise means that your experience is fresh. Your experience is something that is still very vivid in your mind. And you can also capture the emotion that you have at the moment. If I'm going to ask you 1 week later, you're already going to have a layer of new experiences, and other concerns in your mind, and your recollection of the events is going to be much poorer as well. That's also the reason why when I design a conference which has multiple presentations in it with multiple speakers, I make sure that I am asking participants how they liked or how valuable they considered the speech after every single presentation, rather than at the end of the conference. I mean, I know it might sound crazy to you. I mean, you can say, Aleš, does it mean that you're asking your participants they're putting survey in front of your participants every 45 minutes? Oh yeah, I do. Yes, I do. If you structure it properly, it only takes 60 seconds or less to ensure that participants answer. You don't need to ask too many questions. You just ask 2 or 3 questions to get what you need to do. What I'm actually asking after every presentation is I'm asking whether or not participants felt engaged and whether they learned something useful from the presenter. Both of these questions are answered through a 5-star rating. That's what I'm collecting. The third question is an open question for anything the participants want to add. And this is enough to give me information that would tell me whether or not the session was useful. Kind of general principle in here when it comes to data collection and surveys. More often than not, I've seen stakeholders using survey and asking way too many questions. That's not practical because it leads to survey fatigue, where participants just not gonna answer all of your questions. And number 2, you won't be able to realistically analyze all of these answers. So it's better to ask fewer questions, get reliable answers, and be honest with yourself when it comes to what feedback you can or cannot analyze. So that would be why I'm asking immediately. That would be the main reason, to make sure that people actually do recall what they felt and how they actually think about the experience. The answer is more reliable. The second reason, and to ask immediately after the event, is survey participation. Through the events I organized since 2020, whenever I was asking participants for feedback immediately on the spot before the event closed, I was able to get a response rate of 30 to 85%, sometimes even a little higher. With the same audience, when we were asking for participants' feedback through survey later, meaning after the event, 1 day later, we've sent an email asking participants to actually give us feedback. The participation rate was much, much lower. It was anything between 5 and 25% compared to the previously mentioned 30 to 85. So you see the volatility is really huge in here, but you are always going to be much better off when it comes to participation if you send a survey right away. And you're also going to get more reliable data. I see my customers not doing this as a rule, but they absolutely should, and so should you. So that's the way to collect the data and to analyze the data. So let's say you have the data collected. Now, how to analyze them? So I did mention the 5-star rating that I'm actually collecting for 2 questions related to feedback. I was engaged. I have learned something useful. At the end of bigger events like conferences, I'm actually asking some other questions. I'm asking questions regarding satisfaction, like I was satisfied with the event. I'm asking questions regarding the flow. I'm asking whether the event is considered engaging, whether it is considered interactive, because that's something I care about for the way the meetings are run. And there are, of course, other questions that might be specific to the purpose of the meeting that you might want to include. But again, broad topic, and I don't want to drill down into this because we will need a full episode to go into that fully and do this topic justice. So that would be what I have for today. I'm gonna sum up what we covered. We covered the 3 things or 3 questions you need to ask yourself when organizing a meeting, an event, or a conference, regardless which one it is. Ask yourself, what problem are you solving by this event? Ask yourself, how will you know if you have succeeded, if you actually solved the problem? And the third question is, how are you going to collect and analyze the data? How are you going to ask for feedback? You need to have mechanisms in place before you even start organizing the event. So that's something that my customers and most of the leaders tend to forget. I believe if you implement just one of the tips I've provided, pick any that sounds more sane to you, you will see a difference in terms of return on investment, either subjectively or objectively, if you want to put a number on it. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the subtopics, but actually next week I'm gonna be welcoming in our episode a guest who's an experienced manager with engineering background, talking about how engineering expertise can help you with leadership skills and leading the team. So make sure you mark your calendars and join us on Thursday next week for real live episode, because this time I'm gonna be there. We're gonna be taking questions and we're gonna be answering them in real time. If you have any questions related to this very episode, send me a message on LinkedIn or comment on this post on LinkedIn. I'm gonna respond and clear out whatever is not clear to you. I'm also very open and grateful for any suggestions when it comes to other topics, other concerns you might have about events that I could cover in future episodes, because I want to serve you in becoming a better leader, engaging team organizer, and beyond. So that much for blabbering of today. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I'm going back to my vacation. See you next week.